So we got Joe O'Rourke here, GM Bunchu.
GM. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to record this episode with you and honored to be a guest here. So thanks very much.
Thanks for taking the time. I wanted to start with, Bunchu. Where does that name come from? What's the story behind this?
Man, it's so funny. I've been asked this a couple times, and I wish there was a really great story, but it's funny. It actually originated in 2009. So I've had this kind of nickname / alias for 13 years now, which is crazy. And it actually started at a family party on 4th of July, and I couldn't quite tell you exactly how, but the full nickname is Don Bunchu, like a mafia Don. And so it became that my family started calling me that. And so, but then that quickly got shortened just to Bunchu. And then my friends kind of picked it up, and Bunchu kind of just became this alter ego of mine at some point, where it was kind of like my outgoing party ego, like party personality, And so that just stuck. My friends call me that, and my friends all know me by that nickname, and it's been around forever. Yeah, it's so funny. It's just been around forever, and then it's one of those things where once you make it your Twitter handle or whatever, you can never get out of it. You're stuck with it now. Like, people know me that way. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I was on a business. So it's actually really funny. When I first got involved with Adam and Andy and Forum 3 and stuff, Adam would go to all these calls and he wouldn't quite know how to introduce me. So, cause he'd be like, this is Bunchu or Don Bunchu or Joe or whatever. And so it's actually really funny. So, but that's the story.
In a super professional, formal business meeting, it's like, this is Bunchu.
Yeah, we were on a call the opposite happened the other day. We were on a call yesterday or the day before, and I was talking to a very high profile Web3 agency. Everybody would know. And we're doing introductions, and I introduced myself as Joe, and I could see that they were kind of confused, and they're like, wait, are you Bunchu? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, okay, well, that makes more sense. So it's funny. It goes both ways.
You mentioned Forum 3. You're the co-founder of Forum 3 as well as DGen Network. Tell us a bit about your journey in the space. And when I say journey, I'm using quotation marks because it's going to allude a little bit to the Starbucks everything Odyssey that you're building. But tell us a bit about that journey.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story. I call it lovingly the DGen hero arc, because my background, how I found my way to doing what I'm doing now is kind of crazy and interesting. And I feel like it's somewhat inspiring to a lot of people that want to kind of work and get involved in the space. So I first got into crypto in 2017, and I found my way into crypto via sports betting, actually. So it was around the time in 2017 where you couldn't get any money from your bank onto a sports book, and they were all starting to, take crypto and Bitcoin as deposit and everything like that. And so that was how I created my Coinbase account. I had no clue what Bitcoin was. I created a Coinbase account in 2017. I bought my first Bitcoin in May. It was $1,500. And
wow.
I deposited it on the sports book, made some bets, and would pull it off to sit in Coinbase during the week. And it was the time when number went up all the time, right? So I started realizing maybe I should understand what it is that I'm dealing with here. And so that's when I started going down the rabbit hole. And if you're using Coinbase now, Coinbase in 2017 was just Litecoin, Bitcoin, and Ethereum. And that was it. And so, I went down the rabbit hole. There was also no it was kind of the birth of crypto Twitter. I feel like it wasn't really a thing prior to that. And so you got all your information from Reddit and everything. And it was a crazy time.
Okay, so you really had to go and dig into the weeds of like Reddit and like going into forums and all that stuff.
Yes, you were getting a lot of your information from like our Ethereum, and at the time it was like just a bunch of Ethereum moon boys talking about the flippening and all that stuff. And, but once I like started learning about it, it was like a rabbit hole that I never came out of. And I quickly, like yourself, started learning about it as much as I could. And then I found for me, the best way to keep learning about it was to create content about it. So I started a podcast in 2018 with my co-host Chamber. And we've been doing that podcast. That was a crypto specific podcast. We've been doing that podcast. We did it for 5 years. And so we were still doing it. Well, we're still podcasting together. Sorry. That podcast was called Wrecked Podcast. And so we've been doing that ever since. And then in 2018 is when I first learned about NFTs for the first time. And it was just this very DGen thing that was happening on Twitter, which it was called Crypto All-Stars. And it was basically people making trading cards of other crypto Twitter influencers and selling them back and forth to each other. Very Ponzi-nomic type of thing, right? And but immediately I was like, oh, there's value in this. Like I got it from like a digital collectible background because like I had come from collecting physical things all the time, like sports cards, memorabilia, Pokemon cards, whatever. So I immediately like saw the value there, so much so that in 2018, I actually wrote a one-pager that I sent around to some people that I tried to get help building, which was a decentralized art marketplace. I found the one-pager the other day and I looked at the date stamp of it, and it's like May of or April of 2018, which is like 3 months after OpenSea launched. And so like I'm always kicking myself. I'm like, man, I should have maybe done that. And so
yeah, that's early.
But my professional background was always sales and marketing. I spent many years at the Boston Beer Company, which is Sam Adams, and then moved into the medical field in 2017. And I was doing that stuff through COVID. And when COVID hit, I was traveling all the time before COVID, and COVID hit, stopped traveling, had a lot more free time on my hands, really leaned into the like content stuff. And this was also at the same time where NFTs really started taking off. So we pivoted our first podcast into an NFT podcast, ended up meeting Steve, NFT Bark around that time. And him, me, and Chamber started DGen Network. And this was May of 2021. And then from that, I was creating tons of content. I got really into the play to earn gaming stuff, and I was doing a lot of Axie Infinity. And I was just tweeting about what I was learning, very build in public, learn in public type of thing. And I got invited to this retreat. It was by Drew Austin. And if you don't know Drew Austin, he's an awesome dude in the space. He's a he's a VC in his former life, and now he's the co-founder of Knights of DGen. But he's super influential and well connected in the space. And he messaged me and he was like, "Hey, I'm having this retreat," he called it, "at my house in Warwick, New York. Here's all the people that are coming. I'd love for you to come and talk to us a little bit about play to earn gaming." And I was like, me? Like, sure. And so I saw the guest list and I was like, man, I don't belong in the same room as any of these people. So I recognized right away that it was a very interesting opportunity that I had to get myself to. And so I said, sure, Drew. What weekend is it? And he goes, oh, it's actually 2 days from now on Tuesday. And I was like, oh, don't you guys work? and he's like, yeah, this is work, man. I'm like, okay, well, I realized I had to get there. And I was unfortunately supposed to be for my job out in Pittsburgh that day. And so I quit. I quit my job. And
as simple as that.
I quit my job to go to this thing. And I go to this retreat. I keep saying it like that because it was actually like a party, right? It's like a party at his house with all these people, 2-day thing. And
yeah, the way you make it sounds so zen, and like you went to do some sort of meditation.
It was more of It was more of a 2-day house party that he labeled a retreat. And so, when I tell this story, Adam always jokes because I call it a party and he calls it a conference. And I'm like, no, this was not a conference. And so, but at the party, I met Adam Brotman, who is my co-founder at Forum 3. So I took this risk, went there knowing that like my intention was to connect with as many people as possible. I met Adam there and we talked for, 4 or 5 hours that night. He was only there for one night. So that the next week we started doing business together and Forum 3 was born shortly after that, and the rest is kind of history. So that's why I say it's like the DGen hero arc, because I took a huge risk on myself huge bet on myself to kind of up and quit, because I could recognize that this was a really good opportunity for me to make some connections in the space, and it panned out. So, before I am where I am now, I'm just some normal dude working sales and marketing for beer companies and medical companies. I was not a programmer. I was not a technical person at all. Just right place, right time with a bet on myself.
Yeah, just to give some context too, Adam Brotman basically was the former chief digital officer at Starbucks, right?
Yes, correct. He was former chief digital officer at Starbucks, former president and co-CEO, I believe, of J.Crew. He's at Starbucks was responsible for kind of pioneering their current loyalty program and the mobile order and pay that you use, all the time now, which has grown to be 50+% of all Starbucks business is through the app like that. And so, pretty incredible. So yeah, he's obviously had such an amazing career. He's which made us, very well positioned for the Starbucks deal and Odyssey, as we'll talk about a little later. But yeah, so but that's what I mean, right? It was those kind of people that were there at this event, and I kind of was like, okay, no matter what happens, I have to get to this thing.
So what specifically made you click with Adam?
That's a great question. Because it's funny, him and I are so like mind melded, where we just see the world in the same way. We see the value proposition of Web3 and NFTs the same way. And it's funny, Forum 3 started as kind of like, remember, I went there to talk play to earn gaming. So it started with a shared kind of interest in what was happening in the gaming world, right? And at the time, you were seeing all these blockchain games launch with these crazy tokenomics, and we were really interested in what was going on there and studying all of that stuff. And as we kind of started going through this process together and learning about all of these things going on, we shared a lot of the same values in like what the actual value proposition of this technology is and why were all these play to earn games failing and things like that. And we came to this thesis that, it's because of how the structures and the ecosystems are set up in the way that, normal play to earn games as we knew them at the time were all extractive, meaning the ecosystems are funded by the players and they're all trying as hard as they can, as fast as they can to get ROI. So what does that mean is they earn these tokens, they take them out of the ecosystem to pay themselves back. And so what happens there is innately it all fails because it's all extractive value that's being put in by players, not the game or itself, right? There's no flywheel there. It's just extractive gaming, like people pulling out of the ecosystem. And so we kind of had this thought of like, well, what if you took an ecosystem that exists, aka Starbucks, right? And you created similar mechanics, similar gamification, similar incentives, but it had nothing to do with being funded by the company. And it was by the players. Instead, you're doing this same kind of thing with a large company or sponsorships from companies in which the value is actually being given out to players rather than extracted from other players, right? It becomes this, it's not a, zero sum game in that way. And so we kind of went with that thesis. And as you can see what became Starbucks Odyssey, it's very much follows that thought process of, okay, what if we take those same type of play to earn mechanics and we create something that's engage to earn, participate to earn, and all of the kind of rewards and cool things that come out of it are sponsored or budgeted by the brand or company that's kind of sponsoring the whole program. And that's what Starbucks Odyssey turned into. And I know that's a long-winded answer of why did Adam and I think so or get along so well, but it was all this shared thesis around these ideas that got us there, really.
You mentioned couple of interesting points. I think like engaging is the key word here, where you get people to engage with your brand, not necessarily because they just want to, quote unquote, earn something, but because they are really passionate about what you're building. And I know a lot of like raving Starbucks fan that would love to, for example, in Odyssey, and we'll talk about that more in detail, but you have these journeys that basically walk people through, I guess, the story of Starbucks. And if they get like some sort of questions right, then they earn some stamps, right?
Totally. And it's very interesting when you extrapolate that out a little, right? Where it's so Starbucks obviously has one of the leading rewards programs, well-known rewards programs in the world. And I think it's, before we talk about Odyssey, it's important to kind of think and talk about what a normal loyalty program looks like and what it is, right? And so if you think of the example of a Starbucks loyalty program as it is today, it is very transactional and very linear. And what I mean by that is I'm going to give you as a customer incremental visits and incremental spends. And as a company, you're going to give incremental discounts in the form of stars, right? That can be redeemed for free items. Super transactional, super linear, not necessarily engaging at all outside of just the fundamental mechanic.
Spend X and get Y back.
Exactly. Right. It's send me 1 Ethereum, I'll send you 2 back. Right. And so when you think of like that versus what Odyssey is, they're very different. And it has to do with this idea of engagement and participation. And, when you think about what the goals are from a brand perspective, it's to create this deeper brand relationship with the consumer. And it's all currently, we think at Forum 3 that the mindset and what a consumer wants from a brand and loyalty is changing, and it's very different than it was in the past, right? And so like, what does a customer want now? They want that deeper engagement from a brand, and loyalty, I think, is not something that the brand should expect from a customer. It's actually what the customer should expect back from the brand, meaning like, it's at me as a customer, come and get me. You know what I mean? Like if I so what are you going to do for me at this point? Like that's how the customer's mindset is changing. Right. And so when you think of like what Odyssey is at its core, it's a gamified loyalty game. Right. And if you haven't experienced Odyssey yet, here's what it looks like. You log in with your normal Starbucks rewards credentials. So what's cool about that is you don't need to create a new login. You don't need to create any new accounts. You don't need to come there with a wallet. You don't need to do any of that. You just log in with your normal Starbucks account. And once you get inside, there's these journeys that are there. And each journey is differently themed around, there was the first one was the holiday journey that, had to do with the holiday season and things like that. And inside these journeys, there's kind of different activities or checkpoints or things like that earn you points along the way. And it's all about earning points, completing journeys, earning these journey stamps, which are the NFTs of it all, and leveling up. And your journey stamp that you earn at the end of each individual journey has points Odyssey points embedded into the metadata. So you truly own your loyalty points in that way. Those can be bought, sold, traded on the Odyssey marketplace, or if you want to take them out to your MetaMask, self-custody them, they can be bought and sold on decentralized marketplaces like OpenSea. But back to your original question, right, about engaging, it's not pay to play, it's not pay to win. It's come along with me, learn about the brand, learn about our core values, what we think is important, consume our content, and be rewarded, right? So that's actually a really interesting phenomenon when you see how people are interacting with it, right? Like I just had a conversation about this where Starbucks has all this content, tons of content that they've had for years, and they would love for their customers to engage with because it builds deeper relationship with the brand. But nobody was using it. Like all this stuff was out there and nobody ever interacted with it. And now by putting it in this structure of like incentivization, like we've incentivized you to come here, learn more about the brand, and for doing such, you earn something. And people are loving it. Like the response is, hey, this was a really cool video of the Costa Rica coffee farm. I learned more about the brand and I never knew. This was really cool. And it was out there prior, but nobody was using it, right? So you've incentivized somebody to actually learn about your brand, which in turn forms that deeper relationship. And then, the rewards mechanism is totally different also, which we can get into.
Well, it's interesting because by doing that, it's almost like you cut through all the noise of the traditional social media platforms, because so many people are marketing and advertising on there that it seems like everyone's kind of numb to all this content that's being put out. You can make an awesome video that's like super touching, super emotional, and telling everything about the brand. And if it doesn't click and people don't hook for the first 3-4 seconds, that video is kind of, a lot of it is wasted. And I love the fact that you can repurpose it in this Odyssey program that you're launching, where you get people to actually focus on it and you reward them with that. I love this idea of like aligned incentive, and it's a recurring theme we've seen in Web3, right?
Totally. And that's really what it's all about. Aligned incentive, two-way value, right? Those are the things that I think make this whole thing work and that are what's really interesting about it all.
How many journeys are there so far in the beta version?
I think there are 3 that are live. So like that you could go in and start. There's 2 that you can complete definitely right now. There was one, that holiday one that I described was a seasonal one. So what you'll see evergreen journeys that'll be kind of all year round. And then you'll see some seasonal ones that are kind of time-bound pop up along the way. So like the next time-bound one might be for spring, for example. But the ones that are there now are going to, you can complete all year long. So, and then I think each journey has either 4 or 5 different kind of checkpoints in there of different things you can do. What's interesting is like part of the journeys will be things like I mentioned, right? Take the virtual tour of the Costa Rica coffee farm, right? But part of them are also, things that will reward you for activities you're already doing in Starbucks, meaning buying your coffee, because it's attached to your rewards program login. We have the ability to talk to everything you're doing in the normal loyalty app, and it recognizes all your transactions. So for example, the first journey that you're going to see when you go in there is called the Heritage Journey. And it's about history of Starbucks, this, that, the other. But there's a piece in there which is visit a Starbucks store 5 weeks in a row and purchase one of our signature drinks, right? And for a Starbucks, power user that's probably that's on Odyssey, like, yeah, they might go to Starbucks 5 times a week, right? But the idea isn't to force you to buy things at a rate or habit you wouldn't typically. The idea is to also reward you in this way for the actions and activities you're taking with the brand from a purchasing standpoint as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'm wondering if, it's a possibility in the future to see NFC technology kind of enhancing that in some way, because we've seen what G Money has done in Miami, I think, with his 90cc shirts. Like, I wonder if there's a way to implement that into like loyalty systems where if you visit a certain location 3, 4, 5 times a week, you get something special just by being there.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's an idea that we've talked about a ton, not only with Starbucks, but just as Forum 3 and kind of all the opportunity that is out there when, at Forum 3, we're calling this kind of experiential loyalty, right? And so what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of the things you just mentioned, right? There's so many things that you can do to create experiences, and NFC technology is 100% one of them, right? Like there's when you think about like crossing over, especially from brands and activations, right? Crossing this kind of real life participation in action with this digital world activity that you're doing and how to bridge the gap. Like NFC technology is super cool to think about when you understand all the power that it has, not only just by like linking something physical to your digital asset, which is super cool. Like if you, imagine a world in which Starbucks is doing something like this, you could technically then, because your rewards program ID is attached to your NFT, by linking your NFT to your wearable, you've essentially linked your loyalty program to your wearable, which is interesting, right? So now I go pay with that and it acts just like I would if I have an app, or if I, like you said, step foot in a store I haven't been to for the first time. Well, maybe there's a reward there or maybe there's an AR experience there that comes up that you can participate in that wouldn't be there prior or otherwise, right? So I think there's a ton of cool stuff you can do when you think of like this concept of branded experiential loyalty with NFC technology.
Yeah, because I mean, there's so much intangible value that we don't account for. The value doesn't just come in the form of a transaction, right? Let's say, so I'm in the hospitality business and I own restaurants and bars. And I mean, a lot of the value also comes from just customers being there. Like they don't have to necessarily, of course, like they'll consume just by being there. But by the fact that they're there for like 2 hours, it is an intangible value to the business itself.
100%. And I think that, what's really interesting, I actually talk about this specific thing a lot in terms of like why Web3 and like why utilize this technology. It's this concept of being able to unlock a brand's intangible value. And whether it's something physical like in store or at a roastery in the terms of Starbucks, like you're talking about, or just this two-way value exchange that I kind of mentioned before, where, okay, well, one of the Starbucks, let's just keep using Starbucks as an example. These are hypotheticals, but Starbucks is one of the largest brands in the world. They can go collaborate with any other brand, artist, anybody that they could possibly think of. And up until now, it's always been a one-way value exchange, meaning they're utilizing those connections to market to you, not reward you, right? And then, but if you think about all that access and all that stuff that they have at their disposal, not only even within their own ecosystem, within their own stores, within their own content, within their own, everything. But like when you think of outside, like say there's a Mariah Carey holiday thing next year for a hypothetical example. Well, you can take that and create this very cool reward NFT that maybe gives you an access pass to something co-branded with Mariah Carey and Starbucks, right? Like there's that's really interesting.
It's interesting you mentioned holiday and you also touch upon like seasonal marketing, a couple of minutes before, but Starbucks has been at the forefront of that kind of marketing. Like they were the first to come up with like seasonal drinks and everything. And that pumpkin spice latte like became world famous just because like it was for a period of time. So I can definitely see like NFTs really playing into that,
Totally. Especially when you think of like that example I just gave in a way that's gamified, meaning like, hey, we're going to do this very cool activation and it's being exclusively given to people who have done the most work inside the Odyssey game, inside the Starbucks ecosystem, meaning like, hey, because this game is going on and your objective is to complete journeys, earn stamps, earn points, level up, right? Well, now you've got kind of this hierarchy of your most loyal participants, right? That not necessarily have spent the most money, but have shown the most interest and engagement with your brand. And those are people you should be rewarding, right? Because those are the evangelists. Those are your brand ambassadors. Those are the people that are your diehards. And, not necessarily maybe the same person that's spending the most money, but like those are two different values that should both be rewarded.
Starbucks Odyssey is an extension of the Starbucks Reward loyalty program. And from what I read in Odyssey, the beta is a separate mobile web app, right? And it's not integrated into the Starbucks Reward app. Am I getting that correctly? Or?
Yeah, that's correct. So the current experience, and I think it's part of, how you have to roll something like this out when you think of how kind of new and innovative this whole concept and technology is. It has to be separate to start, right? Because one of the biggest things you could fail at is interrupting the experience with the normal loyalty program, right? You're talking about the biggest, most used loyalty program in the entire world. And if you disrupt that with something totally brand new that kind of interrupts your experience there, that you're not going to have a good time. So the idea,
how many users are on that, by the way?
It's a great question. So I think it's like 27 million 60-day actives.
Wow.
In a rolling 60-day period, 27 million people are using it. So when you think of like what Odyssey could become, for Web3 specifically, like could be a major onboarding thing to this technology, which is super cool to think about. But yeah, so Odyssey right now, it's a mobile friendly, mobile reactive web app. So you could use it on your desktop, you could use it on your phone, but it's not, it doesn't live inside the Starbucks app that you use every day. But what is the same is the login, right? So your Starbucks login that you use for your app is the same that you use for Odyssey, which connects all your transaction history. So, you can utilize the Starbucks Rewards account in the same way. It just doesn't live inside the app yet.
Mm-hmm. And pardon me if this seems like a newbie question, but why did you go with Polygon?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, when we started the process, Ethereum was still proof of work. So when you're talking to the Starbucks of the world and these large companies, specifically Starbucks, in which sustainability and environmental concerns are part of their core values, right? So, any proof of work chain at the time was kind of a non-starter, right? Just from that standpoint. So that left us with kind of layer 2 options or other layer 1s that were proof of stake or other consensus types of layer 1s, right? So, when we did our due diligence on all these blockchains, Polygon just stood out to us as kind of the number one far and away from where consumer brands might live in the future, right? You still have all that compatibility that you would have with Ethereum mainnet. So as Ethereum continues to grow and scale and more people are on Ethereum, all the things you can do with Ethereum, you can do with Polygon. But also from a transaction cost standpoint, from a speed and transaction throughput standpoint, the capabilities are much greater than Ethereum mainnet, right? So as far as if we end up having 5-10 million people using this a day at some point, you need to consider scaling. And, if 5 or 10 million people are transacting at the same time, well, we know what happens when you do that on mainnet, right? So it's, but then you also need to, they also need to have large enough network effects at the current time, right? So you can't just pick, a new and upcoming blockchain that, right, because there needs to be some sort of network effect already there. Otherwise you sacrifice things like security and stuff like that. So it's really a delicate balance, but Polygon stood out to us. The team over there is fantastic. Just technically, professionally, their vision is aligned with what we're doing. And then, we're not the first, Starbucks was not the first brand over there as well. So, being able to kind of talk to some other brands that have had activations on Polygon, was really helpful as well.
So you mentioned like the stars that you collect in Odyssey, you can technically, you could list them on any kind of marketplace, right?
Yes. So right now, if you are in the Starbucks Odyssey ecosystem, so what's cool about this is the experience does not require you to have any prior Web3 knowledge, meaning I log in with my Starbucks rewards. I'm created an Odyssey account. In the background, a wallet is created for me that I don't even necessarily know exists until I go try to sell something. But even then, so like the back end, the Web3 portion of it all is powered by Nifty Gateway, who we chose as a partner. So it's a custodial experience, kind of this Web 2.5 type of experience. I call it lovingly like a mullet effect, right? You got Web 2 in the front, Web 3 in the back. And so you've got this experience where the user doesn't know necessarily that they're dealing with crypto or the blockchain. They could interact, earn, sell, all without ever needing to self-custody their asset. However, because we chose Nifty Gateway, which is part of the reason we chose this, we thought it was important to give both options, right? Like we want to be super conscious of the user experience from somebody who has never utilized anything in Web3 before, because again, we might potentially be dealing with millions and millions of people at some point that will likely have never experienced Web3. But we also wanted to promote and give you the optionality to self-custody your own assets, because we think that's super important. And so not only does Odyssey have its own kind of vertical marketplace in which the stamps are being transacted every day now, but if you, like myself, I pulled mine off into my MetaMask wallet. I self-custody my stamps, and if I want, I can go interact with them on OpenSea or LooksRare or wherever. So, same will be with the rewards and everything like that. Really wanted to give the optionality there and thought it was super important to do so.
Very cool. In the future, can we expect to interact or engage with other members of the Starbucks community? And as a second question to that, if yes, like when can we expect that and what would that look like?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So philosophically, Web3 to us is innately community based, right? Like it's all about going from single player to multiplayer in the sense of like connection. And you and I wouldn't be connected without these communities that we belong to, right? Some of our best friends now come from these communities that we're involved in with shared interest in projects or shared interest in topics and things like that. And so Starbucks is kind of a unique thing where they've always kind of had that as a core value in their physical locations, right? Like they talk about Starbucks being a third place. It's like not your home, it's not your work. It's this place you come to, get a specific feeling or do your, meet with somebody over coffee, an old friend or whatever. And so we wanted to help facilitate that stuff virtually as well. So right now there's a small, like very, very small group that is kind of beta testing some community stuff for us. And that's expected to roll out to a much broader audience as early as next week, I believe. So,
oh, nice.
Currently, it will live on Discord. So we're starting with the Discord, but the idea eventually is to bring it into a Odyssey native experience. But so you'll be able to, yes, connect with other Odyssey members, and I think that's going to be so fun. Like we've tested doing community events so far with the small group that we're playing with. And we've done things like conversations over coffee where we interviewed Adam and talked about his story. We've done Odyssey AMAs, we've done trivia nights, and all kinds of cool stuff like that. And so you'll see more of that, and you'll see a lot more of it. It's actually going to be a big focus as the platform grows. I think that's part of what's going to make this, I think, such a really fun thing. Like right now, if you're in Odyssey and you're not in this Discord, it's it's a very single player type of thing, right? But then as soon as you are involved in the community aspect and you're GMing each other and sharing pictures of your drinks, and there's this really interesting thing that's happening organically, in which, like, when you sign up and you sign into Odyssey for the first time, there's a couple different like profile pictures that you can choose, and they're all different animals that have to do with the roasts of coffee, right? There's like the Sumatra tiger, there's the hummingbird, and there's the Yukon bear. And so what's happening in the community is like people are factioning off and, and stuff. So it's kind of funny. So, and that's all kind of happening organically. So I think the community stuff is what's going to really make this a cool thing in the future, I think. And it's also super helpful for disseminating information, getting feedback, co-creation when we get there, which will be fun. Like there's ideas, again, these are kind of hypothetical down the road things, but like the idea of like helping co-create a journey or something like that. And that's pretty cool too. Then that can only be done in that community setting.
Yeah, I can't wait for like a GM coffee or like some sort of GM drink that comes out from Starbucks.
Totally.
And you were mentioning community, and this is a bit left field, but imagine like if there's a way to connect with Starbucks members, if there was like a dating side of the app.
I like that. Speed Starbucks dating.
It's quite interesting sometimes how, showing up, coming back to your story, like quitting your job and showing up is the thing that leads to the next thing that leads to the next thing that you dreamt of, right? Like just by showing up consistently in the Web3 space, learning, engaging, DMing people, and actually creating content via podcasts and spaces, I think you kept your ear to the ground, and now you're hosting, the Mint Condition with DGen Network. How has content creation helped you in your journey? And would you recommend it as a tool to grow within the space?
Oh man, 100%. I would say anybody who's interested in the space should be creating content. And now that's like a scary thing to say for a lot of people, but that comes in a lot of different forms, right? Putting out a tweet about what you learned today, doesn't need to be a thread. Putting out a tweet about what you learned today is content, right? And making a comment on a Twitter space is content. You don't need to launch your own podcast or, network like I did or whatever. But why I say that is through the content that you're putting out, one, you're learning, right? Because there's no better way to learn than by teaching, really. And
actually writing it down.
Yes, right. Because you're forced to kind of explain it especially if you're tweeting, right? A very concise way that's able to be understood. But like, if it's a podcast, if it's a short video, if it's a tweet, right? But like, there's no better way to like learn something than to actually try to teach it or talk about it with somebody else, right? And so I think through creating content, it's helped me. There are a couple of things, right? Like you go through, we're in one right now, this bear market, right? And we were in one in 2018, 2019 as well. And by creating content, it keeps you in the game too, right? Like it's very easy to be involved when its number go up, right? But when you have this drive to kind of create stuff and keep showing up, like you said, right? Put yourself on a schedule to be involved. Like it keeps you in the game, and being in the game at times like this or at times like 2018 when there's bear markets, and that really gives you an edge for these next cycles where everybody's piling in, everybody's looking at it, right? Like, so one, from that standpoint, two, from the learning standpoint, three, from the networking standpoint, like yourself and myself, like you have a podcast and you land this really interesting guest and you have an hour to talk to them and connect with them. And now all of a sudden you have a relationship there that you didn't prior. And it's through relationships like that these opportunities come. And maybe they remember you struck a chord, and they tap you on the shoulder for something, or even if it's just audience building, right? Like when you have a guest like this on your show, the guest comes because he sees value in adding something to your audience, but you as the host also get advantage of, somebody that's following the guest's content comes and stays, right? Like somebody will hear a podcast of mine that's never listened to me before and find me interesting and come back the next time, right? So like there's so much benefit of creating content. I would say the biggest piece of advice would be just to start, right? Like it doesn't have to be, there's no perfect Twitter thread. There's no perfect podcast. There's no perfect Medium article. Like just start, because once you start, you'll realize, oh, this isn't that hard. Like it's not as scary as I thought it was. And even if nobody sees the first stuff you put out, you're learning just by doing it. And I think that's what gives you an edge.
Yeah. And honestly, now the bar is so low for the type of equipment you need. Like, for example, Twitter Spaces, it's really democratized podcasting in a way. Like you can just go on Twitter Spaces and participate just with your phone. You don't need like a crazy mic or a crazy setup. You can just do it on the go. And I think in that sense, like there's just no more excuses. We're going to see like more creators coming into space, and I'm excited about that for 2023. But in 2022, you recorded 50 episodes of the Mint Conditions. Yeah. Congrats, man. That's wild. What's coming for 2023?
50 episodes is that's crazy. It's one a week. It's not like the most nuts thing ever. Like, you see some of our shows on DGen that are daily, and I'm in awe of those. But what's coming for 2023 is the Mint Condition is now 3 days a week. So we're gonna 3x that number of episodes this year. And it's funny, like what you just said about Twitter Spaces is the reason why we're doing it, because this social audio stuff, like it's hard to build a podcast audience, right? It just kind of goes out. You need to drive people there. You need to, it's very much push content, right? But like Twitter Spaces allows you to kind of pull people in organically, and it allows for bigger reach, network right? Effects. So totally. And our Twitter Spaces, so we've actually kind of flipped the model, right? Instead of, we were doing a weekly podcast, pushing it out to all of our channels. And that's great. We've had awesome success doing that. We've built a really fun audience. But what we're actually doing now is all of the content is Twitter Spaces, and we're ripping the audio and putting that out as podcasts. It's interesting. So we're trying something different this year. We're seeing, so far, we've been doing it for, I don't know, a month. And we've seen people from the podcast that were podcast only come and join the Spaces, which is really cool. And then we're seeing people who join the Spaces now realizing they can listen to us on recording or later, right? Or subscribe to us and not have to be appointment viewing, and that's driving downloads. So it's really interesting, the crossover that we're seeing there. And it's just, I think the social audio piece is driving this network effect to both areas, which is fun to see. And we'll see how it goes this year, but lots of cool content to come.
Awesome. You mentioned in a tweet that, and again, you can comment on this if you want or not, but you mentioned in a tweet that you've always considered yourself a positive person, but lately you're finding your default mode to be negative. You challenged yourself to a public gratitude journal in 2023. How is that going, and what have you learned from it?
Oh man, that's a great question. Well, it's funny. The hardest part is being consistent. That's for sure. There's if you actually look at that thread, there's definitely I find that I miss on weekends, which I find that I miss posting on weekends, which I think is probably a good thing when I think about why, right? But it's really interesting. Like I've always thought of myself as default positive. default optimist. And I think just being so plugged in all the time, it's easy to get burnt out. And when you get burnt out, everything is negative. And, I've had some like blessings of life changes. Like I had a second kid, and
Congrats.
that's all stuff that should be super energizing and happy and all this stuff. And when you're like finding yourself in that scenario and you're not being positive about it, you're like, oh, well, I don't like this one bit. Like this is a blessing. I should be grateful for this, and not, oh, it's a burden that I have to change this diaper. Right. And so like when I started feeling things like that, it was clicking with me really easily that, all right, I need to figure out how to change this mindset and kind of force and give myself a forcing function to think about the things that I'm grateful for every day, because I have so much to be grateful for. And so that's why I did it. And
has it helped?
Oh, totally. It's been going great. Like it is, like I said, I've missed some days, but nobody's perfect. But like, you find yourself reflecting a lot more on smaller things, right? Not everything has to be a big win and give you this crazy dopamine hit. It's just when you're finding yourself trying to post about something, it often is something small that you realize, man, this is great, or I should be grateful for this. Or, like I said, I think the other day, it was just like holding my 8-week-old makes me feel peaceful. I'm very grateful for that. Right. Or like, I had a conversation with my dad, and it reminds me, hey, I'm not going to always have this, and I'm super grateful for it. And it also reminds me of things that I don't do enough. Like that same post about my dad. I'm like, I don't tell them enough that I'm grateful for them and stuff like that. And so it's been a really good reflection thing. The hardest part, obviously, like we said, is showing up every day and being consistent with it. But that's not necessarily the point of the whole thing. It's the process of why you're doing it that matters.
Yeah, it's also like not beating yourself up if you miss a day or something. I started like being very diligent about meditation every day. And I would say now I'm at like 6 days a week where I'm super consistent right when I wake up. But, there's always that one day where you wake up a bit later and then you find yourself running after things and you're just like, well, I don't have time,
Yeah,
but,
totally.
So you just have to be fine with those days. But you mentioned something interesting, which is, I think, sparked this idea in my head, but like one of the most addicting things is our own emotions. So whatever you feel and your natural state is, you're going to default into that state. So when you actually wrote that tweet, I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense,
Totally. And it was, like I said, it was like a forcing function to get myself out of that funk, because I was finding like, I'm lucky, and the first tweet should have been that I'm grateful for the self-awareness to even like recognize that, because there's so many people that probably feel the way I felt when I was doing that don't recognize that's what's happening to them. You know what I mean? And so like, I'm grateful that I was even able to recognize that in myself to shake the cobwebs off. You know what I mean? So, and it does it. Not everybody gets that privilege, and it leads to, depression and all this stuff. And it's like, I just don't want to take these things in my life that should be such blessings, because I'm very blessed. I'm super privileged to do what I do every day, work from home, be with my family, have 2 kids, everybody's healthy. And like when you find yourself being negative about some of those things, you're just like, whoa, something's got to change,
So I want to be sensitive of your time too. Do we have time for a last question?
Absolutely.
What would be your message to the people out there that want to perhaps like, they're at a moment in their life where they have to make a big decision, like what you did with, let's say, Starbucks, deciding to quit your job and go to that retreat, quote unquote.
See, you get it.
and you just decide to do that. But, a lot of times like you meet someone like Adam, which can seem so out of league at the time. And I'm sure maybe you can talk about this, but I'm sure you've had some sort of like imposter syndrome, as a lot of people do, myself included, when you're around a circle of people that are just more elevated than you are in terms of like where they are in their journey in life. How did you deal with that? And how did you instill a certain sense of confidence to move forward?
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's a great question. And I have this tweet thread at the top of my Twitter profile that I wrote when the first like TechCrunch article went out about the Starbucks stuff. And in that article, or in that thread, I kind of tell the story that I just told you about my journey. And then I kind of did, I don't know, there's 10 or 11 tweets in there with like lessons that I learned or advice I would pass along to somebody in the same scenario. And the very first one is imposter syndrome. So you nailed it. And it's like the very first one is imposter syndrome. And it's like it kind of is not totally unrelated to what we just talked about as far as like the power of positive thought, right? But like imposter syndrome, I feel like everybody has, and it's kind of a common theme when you think of like, okay, start creating content, just start doing something, just start thinking positively about small things in your life. Like it's just start. And then when I think of like the imposter syndrome that I had, it held me back for a long time in the sense that I was doing so much work in the space, learning, creating content, tweeting, all of these things, but I felt like a spectator, right? Like I felt like I was doing it as a spectator and not a participant because of the imposter syndrome. I always felt like, well, why me? Why should somebody listen to me? And instead, the mentality really should be, why not me, right? Like I'm putting the time in. I know the work that I'm doing. I know that I'm giving this my all, and I know I have value to add to somebody somewhere, right? Like whether it's, you know, I'm not a technical person. I'm not going to go try to, you know, tell somebody how to write a smart contract, but I do know what it's like to start a podcast. There's value there to add to somebody. And so I think I literally say in that tweet, when you stop asking why me and start asking why not me, like that changes, that's that little mindset change. And again, it's just start. And so like when you talk about putting yourself in the league of people you think that you're outside of, right? Like all those people were in search of something there that day, right? Like they were looking to learn something. They were looking to be with people that knew something that they didn't. And
side note, that's also something I think about so much because Web3 has kind of leveled the playing field in a sense that if you do spend your hours on Twitter Spaces and you do stay up to date every day, people that are wildly successful that you would have never thought you could connect with will kind of just like look up to you and try to get some information out of you. And all of a sudden it's like, it's a value exchange instead of you admiring them and being like, oh my God, you're this super high ranked CEO at this company. Well, all of a sudden, like you have some value to provide.
They're in search. Everybody coming into this space is in search of knowledge of how to, you know, do something of what the technology is. And so if you're putting in the time and effort, and again, creating content sounds like a daunting thing. What it really is learning and putting out what you learn and talking to people. And don't like, the thing you just said is really interesting because I tell people all the time, like we're so early in this industry that we're in this very crazy moment in time where everyone is accessible. Like everyone from, you know, CEOs to companies learning about this stuff for the first time to, you know, the biggest influencers. If you are looking to do that, like people you would think you shouldn't have access to are accessible. And I'm not sure how long that's going to last, right? 5 years from now, the people that are accessible to you now might be in a different stratosphere, and you'll look back and you'll be like, why didn't I send them a DM? You know what I mean? Like, I was hanging out with them in Twitter Spaces, listening to the same content, right? Like you can assume if you guys are in the same space, listening to the same thing, you probably have a piece of information that's helpful to somebody, right? Like, so I would just say that little why me to why not me is like the little catchphrase of it, but it's all of those things that we just talked about, and just not being afraid to actually put yourself out there. It's much easier said than done, because typically you feel like, oh, well, this person must know more than me. And it's just not the case so many times. And even if they do, what's the worst that happens? They say no, or they don't answer your DM, and it's on to the next. And, that would be my advice.
I love that. Why not? Well, Joe, it's been a pleasure of mine to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, this was really, really fun conversation. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and looking forward to all of your success this year.
Thank you. Where can the audience find you on Twitter?
Definitely Twitter is the easiest way to find me. It's at Bunchu Bets, Bunchu Bets. So that handle embodies
that comes from all the sports betting.
That's exactly right. That was it's funny. That's how that Twitter account was initially made, for like sports betting and stuff. And it's converted over time, but it follows the whole story. So that's full circle. Bunchu Bets.
Amazing. Bunchu, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Martin. Appreciate you.